All right, hello and welcome to another edition of AF Digital's Masterclass series featuring Pardot. Today we're going to be going through session 4 of the Pardot Essentials, which is all about Engagement Studio. I know this is actually a surprise or a sudden additional session, but I felt the need that there should be a separate session for the Engagement Studio. Um, and yeah, that was what we'll be talking about here today. Engagement Studio is a very powerful tool for marketers when using Pardot. It's not only allows you to tailor experiences for your customers, but it's only limited by the creativity of how you actually want your engagement programs to actually function. But before any of that, uh, let's go through some of the things here. Uh, Session 1, Session 2, all about the intro and the components. We've been through that. Session 3 was which was the last session, was about the automation tools that you can use with Pardot. And in Session 4, this is going to be referenced quite a bit. So if we take a quick look at the agenda here, the very first thing we're going to go through is the automation recap, just some of the automation tools, what they do, what they are, and how, that is because it's automation tools such as the dynamic list, segmentation rules, automation rules. These are all closely tied when you're actually creating an engagement program. And then we'll be moving over to what Engagement Studio and what engagement programs are, and the anatomy of these engagement programs, or what makes these engagement programs. And then we'll be talking about uh, the difference between uh, Engagement Studio and the other automation tools and why you should use them. And then I'll be showing you a couple samples and how you can actually use Engagement Studio to create certain campaigns, basically a couple of use cases, which is the re-engagement and the auto renewal reminder program. And then at the end is more of the behavior and considerations that you might need to take into account when you're creating engagement programs. Right, so let's get right to it. So as I mentioned, first a quick recap of the automation. So here we have the different segmentation and automation tools that we can use in Pardot, which is segmentation rules, dynamic list, page action, completion actions, and automation rules. Engagement programs, they can count as an automation tool, but again, it is almost an entirely different thing on its own that works in tandem with these other automation tools that we have. So let's start with the easiest one, segmentation rules, which creates a list of prospects that you can use for list emails and engagement programs, and that basically functions like a snapshot of your current data, and whichever prospect qualifies for based on the criteria that you set with the segmentation rule takes all those prospects and puts them into a list, and it only runs once when the segmentation rule was run. And the primary use for this is for building lists. So if you're going to create a one-time list of your prospects, segmentation rule is your go-to. On the contrary, we have the dynamic list. So the dynamic list kind of functions like the opposite of the segmentation lists, um, in the sense that it does not run only once, but the main purpose is still for creating or having an updated list of prospects. So dynamic lists, it's a rule based, and it automatically updates whenever a prospect qualifies or no longer qualifies, uh, um, based on the criteria. So it refreshes constantly based on that criteria. It cannot be converted from a static list. It's also usable as a suppression list or recipient list for list sends and engagement programs. And one of the most important difference here is that you cannot manually add or remove prospects into this list. So the only way you can manage prospects with dynamic list is through the criteria that you've defined. And the behavior is, if a prospect qualifies for this dynamic list, they get added into it. And if they no longer fit the criteria, they get removed from the dynamic list. So that's just the thing that you have to remember with dynamic lists. The next automation tool that we have is the completion actions. So completion actions are automate certain tasks triggered off of prospect actions on a Pardot asset or content within Pardot. And it only works with prospects and not visitors. And it works on any page that contains the Pardot tracking code. One thing that you have to consider when using completion actions is that it is not retroactive, meaning that it will only apply the actions once the completion action is active. So let's say you have a completion action that you want to set up on an email so that whenever somebody clicks or opens that email, a completion action triggers a set of actions. It will only apply those actions that you've set for those prospects that opened the email after the completion action was active. So anybody who has opened the email in the past before the completion action was set up, they won't actually trigger the actions of that completion action. Okay. The next thing we have, it's closely related to completion action. That is because it is technically a part of completion actions. So page actions, on the other hand, these are the kinds of completion actions that are triggered when a prospect views page. So the difference here is not a specific prospect action like opening an email or downloading a file or submitting a form. This is simply when the prospect views a page with a Pardot tracking code in it. So functions similarly, it only works with prospects and not visitors. And any page that contains the Pardot tracking code, you can actually put page actions. And at the same time, it's also not retroactive. Now, page actions and completion actions, they both have, they do not actually have a criteria. They're actually just listening off of any actions that may happen with any Pardot asset. But the actions that they have are independent with one another, meaning that they're actions that you can trigger solely on completion actions, but not on page actions. And there are page actions that may not be available with completion actions. And last but not least, for the automation tools that were discussed last week, is what we have the automation rules. The automation rules, it performs certain actions based on both the criteria or prospect actions. So since it's listening for both criteria based for criteria and prospect actions, it's considered as the most broad and most flexible out of all the automation tools. It's also complex enough that it allows for running rules retroactively, meaning that it also considers prospects in the past, not just the present and the future. So if they meet the criteria based on their past actions, they also um, uh, automation rules will apply to them. And it also runs constantly, meaning that unlike segmentation rules or prospect or completion actions, which only triggers once that prospect, does the action. With automation rules, it runs constantly so long that it is active, meaning that it constantly checks for any prospect that might match uh, whatever criteria that you've put in. And a recent feature was it also now allows repetition, meaning that in a previous iteration of the automation rules, that if you already match if you're a prospect that already matched this automation rule once, then you can no longer uh, get get the actions applied to you if in the future you actually meet the criteria again. So that was the previous iteration, but now there's a repeating rule functionality that if you tick this option, you can now actually be eligible to have the actions applied to you once again. And you just have to list the number of days before you're eligible to actually be qualified for this rule. And the thought process of knowing which one to use is actually like kind of like this, in the sense of when you're actually want to use an automation tool, the first thing that you want to consider is what is the rule based on, or what are you actually taking a look at based on the rule. So if you're specifically looking for actions only or a specific prospect action only, then you can immediately uh, go to the completion action. So completion action just listens for any prospect action, and it triggers a set of actions based on that. And if you're actually listening for criteria as well, then you might move on to the next question, which is this rule that you're going to run only for one time? Is it a one-time only thing? If it is, then you actually use segmentation rules. So segmentation rule can only run once. But if it's not, if you're going to do this multiple times and it's based on criteria and action, then you ask yourself, what is this desired outcome? Is it for me to have an updated list? If the main purpose is for you to just have an updated list that's based off criteria or actions, then you're going to use a dynamic list. If it's something, if you want to trigger an action other than just updating the list, then you're going to use an automation rule. And the automation tools, there's several use for that. You can use it to actually manage your lists, manage details about your prospect. You can also send out emails. You can actually integrate certain actions to perform tasks that work in conjunction with your current CRM workflow. So you can assign, if you have record assignment rules, you can assign it via these actions with the automation tools. And last but not least, you can actually also perform scoring and grading management. So the Pardot score and the Pardot grade profile, they can all be managed with the automation tools. Right, so now that we have that out of the way, we'll put that aside from now, and then later we'll get back to it and how it works with Engagement Studio and the engagement programs. So what is actually Engagement Studio? So in Engagement Studio, this is the lead nurturing machine of Pardot. It's the icing on top of the cake. It lets you build, test, and report on what we call the engagement programs, wherein you send targeted emails based on prospect behavior or their actions, and qualify them based on whatever path they take, and based on the values of that of that particular prospect. So engage programs provide a tailored experience for your prospects in the sense that you're actually defining different paths that a prospect can actually take when they actually are actually going through this engagement program. And the main goal is that each engagement program can have its own specific function, but the main goal is obviously to work around qualifying those prospects into leads. And it actually works in tandem with automation rules in the sense that there are certain things that an automation tool can do that an engagement studio cannot do. But the thought process here is that you're using both of these tools in order to make them cooperate with one another and basically have this self-sustaining or self-managing campaign that actually does already the things that you want your prospect to experience. And or to do that, we need to understand what actually uh, what is actually an engagement program composed of. So there's essentially four things, which is the start, the trigger, the rules, and the actions. And Pardot conveniently already color coded this, so any action is colored blue, any trigger is actually colored green, and any rule step is actually um, colored as orange. So let's start with the first one. When you're creating an engagement program, you have to define who enters the program and when does it run. So the major parts of when you're defining the start of your engagement program is obviously the name and the folder where it's stored in, but the recipient list and the suppression list. So you can have several recipient lists, not just one, and you can put that in there. And whoever is in that recipient list, once that uh, once that engagement program is active, they would actually enter the engagement program. Suppression list works the same way when you're actually sending out emails, in the sense that they will still get actually entered into the program, but any emails sends that happen in the program, they won't get sent they won't actually receive them. They won't get sent those emails. The next important thing is defining sending the timings for the sends or the email sends that is in your program. So you can actually define beforehand when your emails are supposed to be sent out. So you can actually implement wait times in the engagement programs when you actually have an email sends, but you can actually define only when an email will be sent out in this section. So at the start, you can define if you only want to send out emails in the business days. So that's Monday to Friday. You can actually select Sunday and Saturday as a Sunday and Saturday as well, but you can also set like a different uh, time period as to when they will be sent out this any email activity as well. And as I mentioned, it also takes into account if you have wait periods before the email sends in the engage program. So later on, you'll see in the samples that I've made, uh, there's email send activities, but there's let's say like 3 days before you actually send out the email. And the way it works here is that let's say if you only set Monday to Friday as uh, your available send days for your emails. If you actually happen to fall in that step on Friday, and that email step has like a 3-day wait period, so um, when the wait period is done and you actually end up, let's say on a Saturday or a Sunday, it's still not going to get sent out during those dates, and instead it's going to send you in the next available day, which is in this case Monday. So that's how business hours and days actually work. And then of course the time zone as to when the specific time zone this email sends will be also this one is also available. And then there's an option to allow prospects to enter programs more than once. So you have to tick this if you're actually creating engagement programs that are actually repeating, or you want these uh, prospects to enter this program more than once. If it's a repeating thing, if you have this later on, you'll see the renewal reminder. It's a sample of a repeating program. If you want to do that, you have to check the allow prospects to enter program more than once. And then we have the triggers. So the triggers, these triggers actually create or branches out paths based on an action that a prospect can take. So you can set up evaluation to the wait period uh, in up to X number of days, or wait a number of X days. What you're seeing on the right side of the screen, this is the list of available triggers that you can have. So it can be based on email link click, email open, file download, and what it's saying is about when you're talking about the up to X days or wait X days, I'm going to switch over to one of the engagement programs here. Let's say with the engagement program, a re-engagement program sample here. While that's so actions are evaluated off of Pardot assets. So these are, you're talking about the landing pages, the forms that you have in your Pardot. But the one thing that you have to consider when you're actually using triggers in engagement programs is that it only evaluates them once they enter the journey. So once they enter the program, rather. So if let's say you have, in this case, an email link click trigger here, and let's say outside of this program, that person, if you sent this email before, they've already clicked on the link for this particular email. Um, once they enter the journey, once they enter the program, rather, it's looking for a new for any new action or any new email link clicks. So the email link click that you did in the past outside this program, that's not what's being listened for here. There's once a prospect reaches this particular step, so when a prospect enters the engagement program, they go in a drip pattern, they flow down. But once they actually reach this particular trigger, it's only then will that program actually listen for if that prospect clicked any link on that email. So as I was mentioning a while ago, you can actually put uh, wait periods in between the steps. So in the triggers, you can actually wait. You have two options, which is up to an X number of days, or wait number of days. So the difference between this is that if you put in wait and then 3 days, it will actually wait exactly 3 days before it begins evaluating, okay, did this prospect click on that link or any link click within that email? But if you actually select up to a maximum of a number of days, then you're saying that within 3 days, if there's a link click, you go to this path, and if there's not any link click, you go to this path. So the difference is that this one is actually actively listening for within 3 days, and this is after 3 days will you only actually be evaluated if you click the link on the email or not. So that's triggers. And again, this is based on prospect actions. So no criteria based at all, not criteria based at all, or nothing, not a specific field value that's about the prospect. This is just mostly any action that they take once they enter this program. The other thing we have are rules. So rules is another step type that we have in engagement program. Here's just a quick list of the different rules available. If you know, it's taking a look, what is the assigned Salesforce queue, who is the assigned user, what's the grade, what's the list, prospect tags, you know, the Salesforce status, the score of this prospect that enters this step. So it defines paths this time for criterias, not for actually prospect actions. And you can actually include up to a maximum of 5 criteria per step. And that rule step actually contains more than one condition is called a complex rule. So here's a sample you're seeing. If all conditions are met, if the assigned user is AFD Pardot and the grade is A+, then they go down this path. If not, they go down this path. Later on, we'll see how this actually works in the samples of the engagement programs. So, and last but not least, we have actions. So actions, this is not actually changing the path of where the prospect goes to, but rather doing a specific action. So here are the list of actions. They can add them to a list, you know, adjust the score of that contact, and you can send out emails. Obviously, the email actions, one of the main things here. You can remove them from lists, remove them from remove tags from them, change values within the prospect, and you know, assign them to users groups or based on the assignment rules. So some of the actions that you're seeing here may only be available if you have Salesforce CRM integrated with your Pardot. So the actions here, the one with the asterisks, those are the ones that would need the Salesforce integration. So now that we actually know what engagement programs are composed of, you might be thinking to yourself, it's actually doing, if you take a closer look at the actions here, if you take a look at it, there are some actions within an engagement program that you can't actually do, but you can do it with an automation rule. And you know, different things as well. Prospect actions, you know, triggers is essentially just listening for, these are just, if you're going to perform actions, if you're going to create a step that has a trigger and then an action on it, it's basically just like a completion action as well. Or if it's rule, it's basically just an automation rule. So you might be thinking to yourself, you know, how is it different with other automation tools? Why would I not just use a bunch of automation rules or completion actions instead of actually just creating an engagement program? So here's a rundown of some of the differences or the distinctions or the benefits of actually using an engagement program. So one of so automation rules and dynamic list, segmentation rules, completion actions, they all run independently of one another, and they all run concurrently, meaning that it doesn't follow a sequence of actions in the same way that an engagement program can. Like, so let's say sending them an email and then listening if they click on the email, and listening if they're, or looking at the value of their score if it's 95 or above. They all run simultaneously. The automation tools all run simultaneously. So if you're going to do that, it's going to be hard. If you're going to rely solely, doing a campaign based off just different automation tools, then you're going to have a hard time actually um, doing a set or an order, following an order of actions, since they all run independently and concurrently. So engagement programs, they run actions, as you've seen, in a linear flow, It's otherwise known as a drip campaign. So it flows down. So it follows this set of uh, steps that they can listen for, that they can perform an action to, and because that we're actually running in a linear flow here, and we're actually following a set of actions, it actually allows for multiple pathing, unlike automation tools that, based on the criteria, they just perform this set of actions. With engagement programs, you can have multiple criteria and then have, let's say, path one, path two, path three. It's not just one set of actions that they can do. So it's more flexible in terms of criteria and actions. Um, Unlike automation tools, which has, when you're making an automation rule, it has the specific criteria and actions available. And dynamic lists and segmentation rules, this is mostly for uh, building lists and automation rules, performing certain tasks. With engagement programs, you're kind of encompassing a campaign in mind that you actually want to happen. So it's a journey that you actually want to happen for your prospects. It's not just a bunch of tasks that you want to be automated. And it eventually just boils down for the other automation tools. Although you can actually do some of the things with engagement programs, the main thing, automation tools, the dynamic lists, automation rules, segmentation rules, completion actions, they're all primarily used for automating the tasks within Pardot. Their main purpose is not to actually tailor a journey that they may have. It's just that their main purpose is actually to work in conjunction with engagement programs. And engagement programs, the primary use for it is to actually build this one of a kind experience or a specific campaign in mind that you want your prospect to experience. So when you want to have like a whole experience tailored that has all these different evaluations, if they did this or not, then you actually go for engagement programs. If you actually just want certain tasks to be automated, let's say to help out an engagement program, then you use the automation tool. But that's not to say that you should just use automation programs and not automation tools, and not vice versa. If you're not trying to build specific campaigns, or you're not doing just for task automation, um, you're going to get the best of both worlds if you actually make use of the power of both of these sets of tools. So now that we have an idea of what an engagement program is composed of, what it's for, what it's capable of, it's time to take a quick look at some of the use cases that you can probably think of, uh, where if you plan on actually using on these engagement programs. So one simple one that you can actually do is a re-engagement program. And with a re-engagement program, you actually the goal here is actually, in my case, my requirement would be, it's actually to send out a series of emails, hoping to actually get some activity based off of those emails, or re-engage those prospects. um, and which prospects specifically? These are what I call inactive prospects, or prospects that have that did not have activity in more than 30 days. So if you're going to do something similar to this, what you're going to need is either a dynamic list that gets all prospects that has not have any activity in the last 30 days, or you could have an automation rule actually apply a tag to prospects that did not have any action in the last 30 days, or did not have any activity with any of your Pardot content in the last 30 days. And then you apply a tag to them that says, like, this prospect is inactive. And then you have a dynamic list that listens for any prospect that has that tag. Then obviously you're going to have to use email templates, depending on how many email sends that you have in the engagement program. You can actually refine it in the sense that you may just use one email template and use a dynamic content to actually just differ that. But the safest thing will be to actually create a different sets of email templates that you can input on the different email sets you have in the program. So let's take a closer look at that in Pardot itself. So the first thing that I have to do is actually I have to get all the prospects that are actually considered as inactive. And the way at my company or my business actually flags them as inactive is that if they don't have any activity within within 30 days. So the first thing I did actually was I created an automation rule, and prospects that has had that's last activity was greater than 30 days ago, or their last activity was from greater than 30 days ago, they would get flagged as inactive. Next then is I'd have a dynamic list that actually managed that actually gets all of these prospects that have been tagged as inactive. Right now I don't have any prospects flagged as inactive. And then once I have this, I can actually now set up the Pardot engagement program. So the engagement program, I'll use that. I'll use the dynamic list that I've created as my entry or my recipient list for that program. Take a look at the start here. Then my dynamic list would be the inactive prospects. And I know what you're thinking. You could probably be, why not just create a dynamic list of that listens for any prospect that does not have any activity in the last 30 days, rather than listening for prospects that has the tag inactive. That is because if we're going to put them in a dynamic list based on the activity, any activity that they perform, even those outside of this journey, let's say downloading a form or clicking on a link or email on other emails aside, or basically any other action that they perform out of this program, they would actually get removed out of the dynamic list. And one behavior of engagement programs is that if you're removed from the list while you're in the program, you actually stop wherever you are in the program. And I don't actually want that to happen. In this case, this is actually more of a specific use case that I don't actually want my prospects to be removed from this engagement program. So basically, if you're inactive, I want you to actually go through this re-engagement program. So that's the reason I actually use a dynamic list that actually listens for the tag instead, so that even if they have any action in the past 30 days, the dynamic list, since the dynamic list is actually listening for the tag inactive, then they won't get removed from this program. Right. So I use that as my recipient list. Inactive prospects I only send out from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I don't actually need for these prospects to enter the program more than once, so that's fine with me. So what I want, once I've set up my start, here's how I actually build out the email, the program rather. So first thing is I actually set up 3 email templates, which is basically the re-engagement email 1, re-engagement email 2, and re-engagement email 3. So the first thing the prospect, they'll start at the top here. The first thing they'll receive if they're inactive is that the re-engagement program email number 1. And then I wait up to a maximum of 3 days. So within that 3 days, if there's any link click, I adjust their score with 5. And then I add them to another list in Pardot, which is what I call re-engaged prospects. So these are the prospects that have clicked or re-engaged with my re-engagement emails, and I add them to that list. And then I actually remove, I think I forgot to add the step that removes the tag inactive from them, but there should be a step here that removes the tag inactive from them. And they just exit out the journey if they click out the engagement email. So this is basically happening 3 times. You get evaluated up to 3 times if they click on that email or not. And basically, we're just listening and adjusting their score, and they're adding them to the re-engaged prospect list if they can actually re-engage with us. And one thing that you should take note here is that I've included an adjust score. So basically, yeah, so in the sense that they're actually re-engaging with me, I want to adjust the score. But when you're actually adding score actions on your engagement programs, keep in mind that it's actually working in conjunction with the current scoring model that you have with Pardot. So outside of programs, Pardot has a default scoring program that you can change the values or the scores for each particular action a prospect may take. And this works even outside of this program that I'm making. So let's say I have an activity that email link click. in the scoring model, it actually adds them +3 by default. I think it's either +3 or +5. And then if you have another, you just have to keep in mind if you're adding another score, then essentially you're saying that you already have a +3 based on the email click of your scoring model, and then you're actually adding another score based on the step here. So it's a total of probably +8 if that's how the scoring model is scoring here. So you're using the scoring model as well, and as well the adjust score steps here. So basically with an engagement program, you just send them a series of emails like this one, and if they engage with it, you adjust the score, add them to re-engage prospects, and remove the tags so they're no longer in this program. And then if they didn't engage at all, what you can do is change the tags into something else that says this person has not been active at all, even after the re-engagement program. Something like probably along the lines of, let's say, cold, or let's say if you have a status field that you have for your prospects, then you can update that status field instead to a value that says this prospect has not engaged at all with us, even after our re-engagement efforts. And you can add that. You can actually improve on this program. You can add, have another step. If they didn't interact with it at all, you have you create a Salesforce task, or you can actually notify users as well. So let's say in this case, this user did not click anything at all. One action that you can do is first you want to notify um, whoever is the assigned user for this particular prospect, saying that this person, you should lower expectations that this person has just not been responding at all to us. And then, adding other steps as well as you can adjust the score. If their score was previously high, if they're no longer responding to us, then you can actually adjust the score to, let's say, a base value of or base value of 50. And that's basically it. That's one of the re-engagement programs. It's one thing you can actually do with that's one sample that you can do with an engagement program. Another one that we can have actually here is that I didn't change the screenshot since I'm going to be showing you it anyway in a few minutes. So renewal reminder program. So you can have this, let's say if you have some membership details or some date that you actually want to have it, it has something to do with having to be renewed. If that's something along the lines your business actually takes care of, and you're talking about uh, wanting to send reminders for these prospects or these contacts or these leads that their renewal date is coming up, then you can actually make use of something along the lines of this renewal reminder program. So in my renewal reminder program, I have a custom date that that is actually being calculated in the CRM side. So let's say this is actually on a yearly basis. So if you applied today, which is June 17, your next day will be June 17, 2021. And that's being stored in a field in CRM. So what you need is actually a custom field, that stores that. And you need to have that field synced with Pardot. So Salesforce Pardot sync, you need to do that. And then you need to have a dynamic list that gets all those who are within 60 or 30 days or about 7 days away from the renewal date, and then the different email templates that you're going to use. So the goal here is send them reminder emails every 60, 30, or 7 days until the renewal date. So the way I did this was actually with Engagement Studio. Let's go back and take a look at the renewal reminder program. So the very first thing I did actually was that I created 3 separate dynamic lists that calculates each of them based on how far they are from their new renewal date. So we're looking at 60, 30, and 7 days from renewal date. So if you take a look at my dynamic list, there should be a renewal due in 30 days, renewal due in 60, and renewal due in 7 days. So we take a look at the criteria for this. Then there would be the renewal date is greater or less than or equal. Great must not be greater than or less than 60. So it's basically just if your days is equal to 60 and your prospect tag doesn't contain the word doesn't contain the tag inactive, then you get inserted into this dynamic list. So one thing you should know is that these prospects will only be part of this list on that specific day. So then we might consider the engagement program to actually, the renewal program rather, to actually be a repeating program that actually enters prospects eligible on daily intervals. They get evaluated each day if they're qualified for this journey or for this program. If we take a look at the start here, the start would be the recipient list would be all three dynamic lists. So basically, if you're when you get evaluated for that day, if you're part of one of those dynamic lists, you actually enter the journey. You can actually enter the program. So let's say I'm a prospect and my renewal date is 60 days from now. I'll be part of this dynamic list and I enter the program. And now the first thing that will happen is that I'll get evaluated. There's a rule step here that actually checks based on if my renewal date is upcoming in the last in if I'm part of this particular list or the renewal due in 60 days dynamic list. If I'm part of that list, I get sent the email that is supposed to be received by those 60 those with renewal days 60 days from now. And that just repeats here. If this one is for 30 days and this one is actually for 7 days, and this actually repeats. So in one day I might be part of this list and I enter that date, and then I go to this path. Then let's say 30 days pass. This time on that day I will be part of the dynamic list. So I enter, and this is a repeating program. So I enter the program once again, and this time because I'm part of this dynamic list, I instead go to this path, which uh, sets me to receive the reminder email for 30 days. And that's the same what would happen with the list for those dynamic who are part of the dynamic list, which is set to receive the email with the renewal date 7 days from now. And you can actually improve upon this list. This is one way you can actually send out your email reminders, and you can actually add, a step here. One thing with engagement programs, the beauty of it is that you can actually easily edit and add more steps there if you want to actually add more steps in between. Let's say you're looking for triggers as well. If they clicked on, let's say, their renewal program emails, then you can have another step. Or let's say if you want to add additional steps if they didn't actually uh, renew, and you can actually store that in a value in CRM as well, and you can actually put it here if they didn't actually renew their or whatever membership that they have, or basically what that renewal is actually counting towards. Then you can actually have that uh, additional steps here after that. So now that we have basic understanding, or some sample use cases in how a renewal or an engagement program or can actually functions, then we can actually take a look at some of the things that you have to really consider and the behaviors when you're actually making an engagement program. So what are the considerations for editing the programs and the different steps within those programs? As I mentioned, the first thing is that you can easily pause and edit the program for prospect changes. Then you can easily restart it once changes have finished. So you might be thinking, what will happen to the prospects when you actually pause a program? That depends on what step they are. But basically, the general rule of thumb is that they leave where they come back where they left from. So if let's say if you're on the step, you're on a wait step that waits for 5 days, and you're on the second day of that step. If you pause it at that time, once you resume it, you're going to have to continue that wait step before you actually continue uh, to the program. And basically, any step you're in the program in, you can just once you get pause there, when you restart it, you just move towards that. So you can edit that easily, add few steps, and then just restart that. So email templates. So email templates are actually easily edited as well. You can edit them outside of the program, even if the program is running. And metrics, and actually when you restart actually that program, uh, actually when you actually take a look at the program, you'll see the different versions of that email as well. So even if you're making changes with the email, you can easily just pause it, make changes to email, and then click, then just restart that email, restart that program rather. Now, when you're adding steps to the program, a prospect will not go through them if they've already finished the program before it was added. So let's say I'm part of this renewal program and I move through the different steps here. Let's say this is not a repeating program, and I move to the end here, and you see whichever prospects are in what step. There's actually a counter here. You'll see that if you're at this portion or when you finish this program and you add steps afterwards, let's say I edit it, I pause this and I edit, and then I add steps. Once I restart this program, prospects that are already in this step will no longer receive the new steps that were added. So once you've exited out the program, you're done. And when you remove steps, prospects that were on those steps are instead moved to the next step. So in this case, I have, let's say, an email activity that sends them after, like, say, for after 3 days. If I'm on day 1 of that wait period for that send email, and I remove that step from the program, I will instead move to the next step in the program. So that's basically it. So one thing I haven't actually shown you guys is that you can actually see the performance of the prospects based on the different steps here. So if you take a look at this email send, you see how many are still waiting on this step, how many have been sent this email, how many opens, the click-through rate, the opt-outs in this email step, and how many bounces that you encountered with this email step. And then some other things you need to consider when a prospect is removed from the recipient list. So this is not pausing the program, but rather removing the prospect from the recipient list that is part of, that is actually the recipient list of the program. Then the prospect stops moving through the program. Doesn't matter where they are, so long as you're removed from that list that program is using, you'll automatically stop moving through that program. So now, when you add that removed prospect from their list, it's the same thing. They start where they left off. Now, there's a different function when a prospect this time instead opts out. They move actually through the program. That is because there may be steps that are not email related. Let's say just adjusting the scores or flagging them as opted out, or updating who the assigned owner is. But essentially, what would happen is that if the prospect opts out and they're part of the program, they would still move through the program, but they will not receive any program emails. And one thing you need to consider is a program becomes inactive when no new prospects have been added within 30 days. So the program will become inactive. There's no new prospects being added in, and will eventually reach this inactive status within Pardot. And that's basically it. So those are just some of the considerations. There's a lot of more things if you're interested in building the engagement programs. Several other considerations you might have based on the actions you want to happen with the engagement programs. But these are just some of the things that you have to think about when you're actually creating engagement programs. So I think I've reached the end of my presentation, and we've actually finished fairly actually quickly here. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Yeah, feel free to ask them in the chat. Maybe I can wait about a couple minutes. There's not a lot of people in this call anyway, so probably about 12:55. If there's any questions, I can still answer them up to that point. I'll wait for that right now. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us all throughout the sessions for the Pardot. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for listening in. I hope you've learned, and I hope you learned some new things about Pardot. And if it's something new to you entirely, I hope that piqued your interest with Pardot. It's an excellent tool for marketers. If you're interested, feel free to contact AF Digital. And I'd also like to thank the previous speakers that we that conducted a few sessions, which is Kate, Kev, and Karen. They did an excellent job introducing Pardot to you guys. And yeah, I'll be waiting for those questions. And I'll stay on the line here if there are any questions. In the meantime, as well, we're also regularly actually scheduling masterclass sessions on different topics. So if you're interested in other ones, such as this one, you can actually just go to our webpage or follow our social media pages to be updated if there's any new masterclass sessions that will be available once again. But if you actually want to listen into the past sessions that we've had for other topics, such as Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, also Marketing Cloud, and Social Studio, we have also uploaded that into our YouTube channel. So actually just feel free to hop onto our YouTube channel, and you can actually go and listen to some of the recordings of our master classes there. Right. So I don't think there will be any more questions at this stage. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining, uh, and thank you for listening. Once again, this has been Zeke, and I hope you all have a great day ahead.